Welcome, everybody. We are thrilled to be presenting the third and final of our panels in the series Vote, Su Voto es Su Voz, with an outstanding panel of truly diverse talent, activists, politicians, attorneys, journalists, anthropologists, all of whom have some direct relationship to this case. And they will tell you much more about that. And I just want to thank all of you for coming. As most of you know, this is part of Su Voto es Su Voz, Your Voice is Your Vote, exhibit at Pajaro Valley Arts. The show is only up this weekend and next weekend, so if you have not seen it, 11 to 4, Wednesday through Sunday are the hours to go. It's free and open to everybody, and we're delighted to have you here. And I will introduce our moderator, Samuel Torres Jr., and he will introduce the other panelists. Unless you want me to give a description of the people, or no? He will take care of it. They're in good hands.
Maria?
Judy?
Could we make an announcement?
Oh, yes. We have simultaneous interpretation for anybody who prefers to listen in Spanish from English. With Mindy, and she has the headsets there. She's very good. Thank you, Mindy.
Thank you, Maria, and I'd like to thank the PVA and all of the staff and the volunteers there who made this possible today. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming out on a rainy Saturday to listen to this. I see you nodding your heads, that's great. We plan to discuss the Gomez versus City of Watsonville case, the case that forever changed the political landscape of the City of Watsonville, a change that would not have occurred without judicial intervention, the case that ensured the opportunity for the political integration of all of Watsonville's communities. And as an example, this is what the landscape looked like before the trial. These little circles are where the council members lived, 5 of them living in close proximity to each other. Notice that the section where the large Latino population was had no representatives living in that district. This was changed to what we have today, a colorful array of colors as opposed to the black and white of the past. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to discuss the case itself, what was going on in Watsonville before the case was filed, and what happened to Watsonville and the state of California after the case was filed. First, I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves, and I think I'll start with Paule, if you could introduce yourself.
Okay, well, professionally, I'm called Dr. Paule Cruz Takash. Is it on?
Yes.
Yes? So I don't have to do anything? Good. All right. And it is a real pleasure to be back here in Watsonville. And then we'll have a chance to talk a little later. Yeah.
I want you to hold them.
Oh,
Yeah.
we're sharing this.
It's okay.
Are we doing intros or are we just?
Yeah.
Mic check, you hear me, nephew?
Turn it on. That's what all that signal was about. You had it down.
Okay.
What are you doing?
Usually we're like chewing on it.
Paule, maybe we should share this one.
You can pass that one around, it works.
Good afternoon, buenas tardes. My name is Daniel Dodge, Senior. Since my son has become an elected official, due to district elections, I might add, that I have to use that title now. I'm a little overwhelmed. I just barely realized on my way over here that it's been 30 years since this court decision and how it's affected my life and my family's life. Just being in this building is rather remarkable. There's a whole story behind how that happened. I'm honored to play a role in a lot of different things. If we wanted to, I'm going to skip since my formal who I am, although I will mention that I am due to district elections, due to the cannery strike that happened here in Watsonville, It changed the whole landscape of not just the city of Watsonville, but of the state of California. And Latinos, Mexican Americans, Chicanos were not a political force, so to speak, on statewide politics. And now we've reached the diverse opinions from having the far left to the far right made up of Latino politicians across the state of California. Whether that's good or not, I don't know. So let me pass the microphone on. I could talk for way too long. Thank you.
Any of us can, I think. So I said I'm happy to be back in Watsonville because I came here in 1986, 4th of July 1986, for the purpose of doing a study on a community, the city of Watsonville, that had been founded by white Americans, Yankees from the East Coast as they call themselves, and also European immigrants who had settled here and become residents here in the city of Watsonville. By the time I got here in 1986, and actually by 1980, the city had already become majority Latino. And so the city of Watsonville presented itself as a case for the ethno-racial transformation of the United States that I could tell was going to be with us up until this moment. So I am an anthropologist. I also have been a city commissioner in the city of Los Angeles. I'm on the Human Relations Commission, so I've done a lot of human relations work. I have 4 programs in the city, in the country, the city of Oakland, city of Richmond, California, Hartford, Connecticut, and the city of Detroit, where we issue a municipal ID card to be able to provide an ID for all the folks, homeless, at-risk reentry, immigrant folks that don't have an ID. So we're doing that as well. But I had the opportunity to work on this case with Joaquin Avila and all the other persons that made this case happen. So this will be unfolded, I think, in this panel.
Thank you. Karina?
Good afternoon, everyone. Karina Cervantez, and I'm very happy to be back. Only I think Maria Gittin and Samuel Torres could bring me out of retirement or hiding, however you might want to frame it. But I had the opportunity and the privilege to serve on the city council here from 2012 to 2016 and served as mayor in 2014. And I absolutely entered public service very early, serving as a Parks and Recreation Commissioner and a Planning Commissioner, and then eventually running for office. But I always acknowledged, and I still do, and I recognize that without those doors being kicked open for me by many of the panelists here, but also many of the women that spoke on the previous panel, El Florecer de la Mujer, I would not have had this opportunity to represent the community. And so I'm here to speak about that legacy that, whether you like it or not, you live in Watsonville, it's part of who we are today in the present. And so I'm just very happy to have had this opportunity and also humbled to be included on this panel.
Thank you, Karina. And my name is Samuel Torres Jr. I'll be your moderator today. I am the son of Puerto Rican migrants. I call them urban migrants because they moved to New York City in the 40s, moved to Arizona in the 60s, and while in New York, we lived in the South Bronx and 7 other inner city ghettos, I would call them. I wound up going to college, first in my generation, and went to Arizona State University, got a degree in Bachelor's of Science in Sociology, and got hired by the Social Security Administration to be a Spanish-speaking interviewer. At that time, I wound up in 1973 being offered a job in a town I'd never heard of. The town was called Watsonville. And so I talked to some friends and said, hey, that's a good deal. And I came to Watsonville, and that's where I became the manager of the Watsonville office, and that's where I got my first connections with the Gomez case. I became friends with a gentleman named Jose Maria Merino, Chema, who was very, very active in the community, and he later became very active in the Gomez case. He wound up recruiting me to be on a board of directors of an anti-poverty program that he was on their board also, called La Comisión. and he convinced me to come on the board, and I wound up being the chair of that board until I went to law school. And I wouldn't have gotten into law school if not for chairman. He had a connection up at Berkeley and got me in under the special admissions program into Berkeley. And 3 years later, I was back in Santa Cruz County, a lawyer. Went to work for the county of Santa Cruz for 25 years. First as a senior analyst, and then as every job in the county counsel's office, including being appointed by the board of supervisors to be the county counsel. I did a lot of litigation, complex litigation, which involved things like landslides and sewer spills and the Pajaro River levees failing, things like that. And also in the late 80s was involved in something called redistricting and looking at the way the electoral process was working. I was actually assigned to review and monitor the Gomez case and to help the board with recommendations for the implementation of whatever that case was going to be. I wound up retiring in 2005. In 2010, I was a finalist for the State Redistricting Commission, and since then I do very little law, almost nothing. But I do much gardening, basketball playing, and photography, and some volunteering. Now I volunteer for several Watsonville organizations, including Pajaro Valley Arts, the Watsonville Film Festival, and Digital Nest, among others. And I co-produce a digital photography and video exhibit in Santa Cruz called Open Show Santa Cruz. Today I'm here as a volunteer for PVA, and we're going to have a discussion, and I think I'd like to have Paule start the discussion with painting for us sort of a picture of what Watsonville was like during that time.
Hey, so can I just jump in?
Sure can.
Real quick, since we did the formal introductions. Excuse me for being a little emotional earlier. For those that don't know me, my name is Daniel Dodge Sr. I was born in San Jose, California. Raised here in the beautiful Monterey Bay Area. I am a politician because I learned it through this process. I graduated from Santa Cruz High School. My grandchildren are the 7th generation of my family to live here in the Pajaro Valley. I'm a former cannery worker, Teamsters 912, member of the historical strike that went on here in the city of Watsonville. I was able to be schooled and guided by Waldo Rodriguez, good friend of mine, call him my Nino in that sense, one of the plaintiffs of this case. So I became familiar with the case and my good friend Cruz Gomez and others after the cannery strike, where we knew that we had no representation on city council. And the city council actually used city resources to combat the strike, made up of over 2,000 women and who led that strike. Because of district elections, I've been able to have an extensive public service record. I served as the chairperson of the Latino Affairs Commission, which came out of when the Department of Justice visited us during the earthquake and found that they looked at it and said, wow, there's no Latino representation on the county level, and formed a commission. And in that process, we've been able to bring juvenile justice reforms and help bring this building to court services. So I'm a former mayor of the City of Watsonville, city councilman from 2010 to 2014. I've been involved in the labor movement my entire adult life. I was raised in the United Farm Workers Movement. I'm currently the executive director of the Career College Federation of Teachers, AFT 4400, AFL-CIO. And I'm really honored and excited to be with my friend Paule Takash here. My goodness, I can't wait to hear your story, so I'm going to hand the microphone right back off.
So many stories in so little time, I would say. And there are so many folks that were involved in this case. We just represent a very small number of them. And I say that because this, as someone said, this would not have happened, and the representation we have now and the actual policy changes that happen as a result of getting not only Latinos into office, but also getting folks of a liberal progressive ideology. Okay, so this case was not only, although it was MALDEF, and part of the struggle was about getting folks of color, breaking a racial ceiling, okay, very important, that had kept qualified individuals out and kept our communities unrepresented and kept material benefits and resources from our folks. This was also a struggle for anyone of liberal, progressive ideology who also was trying to struggle along with us, trying to get those issues attended to, addressed. And so the MALDEF lawsuit is a precedent-setting case for racial, ethnic, minority voting rights, but it is also one for allowing ideological, liberal to progressive folks to get into office for the first time at that time. They had been actively kept out as well. So when I first arrived here, the case was being discussed by the community. So yes, it was a judicial intervention was absolutely necessary, but it would not have happened. It would not have happened without the community folks. And I think that's a critical lesson, that we need to be teaching. If it's not already being taught, and I'm hearing from some teachers here that it's not being taught in the schools, okay? And I'm saying as early as elementary and middle and high school. That needs to be taught because it was the mobilization of community folks, okay, everyday people like yourselves, like ourselves, that brought that, this to the attention also of MALDEF, okay. MALDEF had been doing these kinds of voting rights cases around the country, in particular Southwest, but without that mobilization of folks. And that mobilization of community folks had been happening for decades before. I believe that you had a panel, I know you had a panel by Mujeres here, about some of that history, but it's a history even longer than some people know. And we want to underscore that, we want to carry that out into the community, okay, to our families, to our organizations, because it is critical. It is one of the ways in which people are oppressed, okay? When you are told, and we come to believe, that the reason why we have no power, okay, why we're not in those positions of authority, if it's as a school principal, if it's as a director of the CAB, if it is in elected positions, okay, we are told, when I say we, I mean folks of color of every stripe, I mean people of liberal to progressive ideologies, okay, this is the history. But when we are told that the reasons why we don't have power, we're not in those places, are for several reasons. One is because we haven't ever tried, okay? And some of us repeated that because we were told this. We're looking around, we see no people as our school teachers, at Cabrillo, the trustees, it's just in our classrooms, and we begin to, we internalize that. Some people have internalized that, and it is a powerful tool of oppression, okay, to keep people believing that it's our own fault, the population's own fault why they haven't gone there. Also that we don't know American democratic institutions. It was another statement that would be said, okay, as I'm interviewing folks here in Watsonville and asking the question as to why in a community that was already over 60% Latino, why is it that there is no elected positions, and you could go across the board in all the different institutions, right? Very few persons of color in any of those positions. And I would be told this, well, Paula, we would be very happy to vote for a qualified Latino if there were any qualified people, okay? And so I, as an anthropologist, I'm listening to the person speak. So then I said, well, what's your definition of qualifications? What are the criteria? And I would take down that list, what it was, that they had to serve on a community, at-large community organizations like the American Heart Association, the Girl Scouts, etc. That they had, this is like for everybody, that they had to, they really liked it if you graduated from Watsonville High School, so they had a list of criteria. So then you take that criteria, you do the research, okay, about the, who had won, and at that time, in a space of 14 years, okay, 14 Latinos and Latinas had run for office, all right? And progressives, and they also had all been kept down. So then you take that criteria, you do this study, the research on all of their campaigns to see, are these folks correct? we're these fly-by-night Latinos, that, really shouldn't have been elected because, one suggestion was they're all radicals and they want to burn down the city hall, etc. Right? They're all radicals, that's why they don't get elected. Or they don't have the qualifications. And you just do the research. Okay, that research became part of the MALDEF lawsuit. Okay, working with Joaquin, you do that research, and then you go, my goodness, all these candidates. They're different ideologically, they're different political persuasions. Okay, we have conservative Latinos who ran, moderates, we have more progressives like Cruz, and others. We had a lesbiana, Latina who ran for office as well. There was great diversity in the population. But they never got elected. Their qualifications, when I examined it, they overmet the list of the required qualifications that the folks here, the status quo, those who have power, said was that they would vote for any qualified Latino, Latina, if they met the criteria. Then you look at those that actually were elected and were supported, and you found easily that many of them did not have those same qualifications. So it's a concrete way in which you can actually make that statement that there is polarized racialized voting going on here. So looking at...
Still exists.
So the voting rights case, we went to one of the churches on East Beach Street with the LULAC members. Celia Organista was then the first woman president of LULAC. And I have to say that the men who had been the leadership, they all took their toys and went away when the first woman came into office in the LULAC then. And this is gender, and this is race, and this is sex, and everything else. But Joaquin Avila and a couple of other MALDEF folks, Chema Marina was there as well, a good friend of Joaquin's. They met with community members. They had asked them, Cruz and others had asked them to come to Watsonville. And they listened to what MALDEF had to say, and then they made a decision that yes, they would support LULAC formally as an organization would support as a friend of the court. Christine Lyon-Johnson, who was then the executive director and for many years of CAB, her organization also in body and also in spirit, she was part of LULAC as well, supported the MALDEF the decision to go forward with this lawsuit. This was not a small decision. When Cruz and Waldo, there was another woman that was involved originally and then pulled out from that. But this was a major decision because if you lose a case, okay, you could be, in debt, because then as losers you pay. And, so this was courageous acts on the parts of Waldo and Cruz and recently the other woman to actually say, yes, we will step up and we'll be plaintiffs in this case. And so that is, again, from the community, we don't have enough time here, but you want to know, and I know that the women's panel did a good deal of the historical stuff, but you want to know that this was in the context of the cannery or the frozen industry strike that Daniel mentioned, okay, that was going on at the same time, okay, as the other Chicano Latinos and their supporters were deciding to do the MALDEF lawsuit. You would walk outside and there were stones being thrown and there were people losing their housing, the strikers losing their housing, all kinds of things going on there. So it was in that context. But it was in a context where this whole ethno-racial transformation and the fear of that, okay, the fear of that by the folks here in Watsonville had been going on for a number of decades, okay. And so it manifested itself in discussions about how the schools were being taken over by Chicano Latino kids, how to be a bilingual, to be a teacher's aide, you had to now speak Spanish, that the plaza was being taken over, that the movie houses were being taken over. So there was this takeover, concept, of fear here in the city of Watsonville. It is the reason why I decided to come and live here, because of this ethno-racial transformation, the fear, and knowing, as demographers had already predicted for 1970, okay, that's the trajectory here, that this was what was happening in Watsonville, was what we're going to be faced with as a country, that Watsonville would be able to serve as a model, okay, as to what happens with this ethno-racial transformation. It is scary for many people. And when Chicano Latinos are the majority and we have another population that might be, it's going to be scary, okay? It's scary. But so what happens? Do we lay siege to City Hall? Do we bankrupt the city? Do we then do to others as that has been done to us? As one of my informants here, an Irish-American gentleman that I got to know really well, he said to me on the eve of the first elections in 1989, December 1989, he said, Paule, he lived on Brewington Avenue. You all know what that means? Yeah, yeah, exactly. These are the community understands that I look for as an anthropologist, right? So Brewington Avenue, okay, he lived on Brewington Avenue, and he said, Paule, now that you all, I'm like all Latinos and everything else, now that you all are taking over, this is the night of the first district elections, okay, Cruz is running, others are running, Todd McFarren, Lowell Hurst is running, okay, no, Lowell not, Par Eves, okay.
Myself.
Yourself, all the folks are running, okay. He says, now that you all are taking over, will you two do to us what we've done to you? Okay? Good guy, had been a car dealer, had an owner of a car dealership, born and raised here, very Catholic, but it told you, okay, that he understood that something was not right, okay? And that there had been things done to the minority populations, okay, by the majority population. And he was seeing a future where he thought that would we do to them, to him, and to white folks as had been done to us. And that is one of the issues we face right now. I know you're giving me a time here, so I would end right. I said to Jerry, because he was very Catholic, I said, and we were there on Brewington, I said, Jerry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out the back and I'm going to slaughter a lamb. And with the lamb's blood, I'm going to draw a cross on the front door. So when all the Chicanos come sweeping down Brewington Avenue, they'll pass over your home. And so we're kind of joking, but it kind of wasn't a joke, for him in particular. He didn't, we laughed about that. But so that is sort of the context, okay, in which Watsonville found itself in the early 80s. They had been building for decades as the Mexicano Latino population or agricultural workers and other workers were settling down. And they were settling down not because Watsonville is a beautiful place to live, it is, but because the agribusiness was shifting and required a near year-round population, and therefore a labor population, and that's why they were settling down, that's why their children were here, they were putting down roots.
Thank you. And Paule's had several papers where she chronicles all this in great detail, and she is chock full of stories that I'm sure she'd love to share with you after we're done with the panel.
You have 2 weeks.
and so, Karina, at the same time when this was going on, was, as Paul alluded, this wasn't unique to the area of Watsonville, was it?
No, it wasn't. So I didn't, as part of my introduction, provide sort of my roots. And I didn't grow up, or I wasn't born in Watsonville, but I do feel that I grew up here politically in many ways. And it was due to this case and learning the living history of Watsonville when I got involved in the first political campaigns. But I am the daughter of immigrant farm workers from the Central Valley, a little town, Terabella specifically. And to this day, we are still having fights about shifting over to district elections. And I grew up in an unincorporated community, but the nearest city to me was Porterville, California, and that's just now shifted over to district elections. And same challenges, there wasn't any Latinos that were able to win city council elections, with the exception of one woman who happens to be the cousin of Rebecca Garcia, who is also a council member here. So talk about having it in the blood sometimes. But I was only 9 years old when this legal battle was playing out. But I would say, reading Paule's scholarship, what I appreciate about her as an anthropologist, as an ethnographer, and being able to capture those dominant ideologies that permeate through all of our institutions, the political system being one of them, was definitely something that I understood very young. I understood injustice very early. Many of the children of the Pajaro Valley understand it because they see how their parents are treated. They see how their parents are talked to. But on the flip side of that, they also see the courage with which their parents face daily indignities. And so I understood that I had a responsibility, and I also had a huge privilege because at the age of 9, I was immersed in my local library, the world of letters. I had this incredible privilege to learn, to be able to learn, because my parents were out there in the fields, in the hot sun, working hard. And it's something that makes me emotional because their dreams and aspirations when they had children were no longer about their own achievements. It became about the aspirations for their children. And so that hard work is what allowed me to sort of come to UC Santa Cruz, be able to transfer from a local community college. And that was my first introduction into Watsonville. So again, all this was playing out. I had no idea. My first introduction into this beautiful community was driving by the plaza, falling in love with the bandstand, the kiosco, saying, wow, what a beautiful place. It reminds me of where my parents grew up, in Michoacan. And so all of that, I know that it was also something that many of the women panelists shared, sort of the pull, the draw to Watsonville, sometimes without fully understanding it. You just know that there's something here. But that was my first introduction to Watsonville. It was the placita that I would come to represent, District 2. Starts at the plaza on over to Cabrillo College and also Watsonville High School are all included as part of District 2. And so for myself, it's just understanding why people sometimes shy away from participating, and it being all of those ideological barriers that you so vividly described, and understanding and living them, but also recognizing that community can mobilize against it, and they do. With the very little that they have, they mobilize against it, and they work to try to create something better. And so I would say that for me, that's the underlying fight for district elections, is a full inclusion in our political process. And so that is something that I learned, growing up in the Central Valley and still seeing some of those struggles and those fights that were fought earlier on here in Watsonville, but still continue throughout California, and I would say, obviously, in the United States right now with everything that's going on.
Thank you, Karina. So that was the picture of what the landscape looked like, and then the community organized and decided to take legal action. And we are very fortunate today to have the paralegal, and I call him the data cruncher, for the case, which is what actually won the case when you get down to it, Daniel Dodge, Senior.
Again, just a little overwhelmed at realizing that a greater part of my adult life has been spent involved talking about this case and living it. I think when we're talking about Gomez versus Watsonville, we have to really understand that there comes a certain point in our society where just standing on the corner holding a sign, and I've done it many times, is just not enough to be able to create social change. So when we talk about in the context of a lawsuit, this was our way, reflective of the community, to be able to challenge the system, to challenge government, that we had no access points of anybody speaking Spanish for a community that was 60% Latino. None. We can go to the earthquake and I'll mention some other things that happened during that time period. But it's important to recognize that Watsonville is not the community that you see it today. Watsonville, here in Santa Cruz County and throughout California, we don't like to talk about segregation because we're beyond that. Watsonville is a segregated community in one of the richest areas in the state of California. It was in 1989, and all the social, economical factors that can define segregation are still present today. The difference being we didn't have any access to government. The great festivals that you see that are held downtown in the city of Watsonville to celebrate Mexican Independence Day, non-existent, right? And I can go on and on with specific examples. Community program funding, we had nobody in 1989, there were no elected Latino officials in the county government. Oh wait, there's still no elected Latino officials in county government. That's for you, my friend, amigo. So I wanted to be able to say that because even though we've made substantial sociological change here, we come from a context where people of color have built the labor force in the Pajaro Valley since the beginning of the Pajaro Valley. The history of labor and the history of immigration are tied directly to the city of Watsonville and the challenges that resulted, the Filipino riots, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the burning of Chinatown. The great editor of the Pajaronian, Radcliffe, was advocating for the Chinese being excluded out of Watsonville. There is a whole history of discrimination here against people of color. And I always think that we need to mention that when we talk about what brought us together to be able to make that change. Well, it was being tired of all those things, and it resulted in the cannery strike. And the Watsonville cannery strike, I'm sure we're going to do another production on that, so I'll save that for later. But in the context of that, Joaquin Avila could not be overstated on what a great individual that man was. I mean, he was one of the first Chicanos to go through Harvard, Yale School of Law, although I might mix that up. He might have gone to Yale as an undergrad and then Harvard. He used his academic education to become a lawyer to challenge voting rights. And when we talk about voting rights, we always think of it in the context of the African American struggle in the South. But he brought that struggle to Texas to challenge at-large elections and how that discriminated against people of color, in particular the Mexican American community, electing representatives of their choice. Not just Mexican American representatives, representatives of their choice. So when we came to Watsonville, Willie Velasquez, I was in on that meeting with Willie Velasquez and Waldo Rodriguez and Cruz Gomez and Joaquin Avila and several others. And I challenge everybody to look up who Willie Velasquez was and what a difference he made.
We showed the film, yeah.
That's right.
And it's online.
That's right.
They know.
Yeah. Well, it happened here in Watsonville. And it happened here so that we were able to change the precedent. When we look at these cases, before Latinos, again, why the census is so important and they want to be able to take the citizenship question away, before Latinos in 1980, we were Spanish surname. And there is still an official Spanish surname list that if your last name is on it, then you could be considered in that category, Latinos.
Is Dodge on that list?
Actually, it's not, but either is Torres with an S. But,
Many of us are happy.
you know, half-breed children were legal until 1965. Half-breed children were legal in the United States in 1965, but we'll get to that point later. But so to build a case, we had to be able to take the research to be able to prove that there was discrimination against Chicanos, Mexican American, Latinos in the community. And there were very few Latinos at that time in the community. It was when Oscar Rios came that he was able to highlight the Latino. We were a community of second, third generation Mexican Americans that worked in the canneries and recent Mexican immigrants that came, particularly at that time, because of the conversion from apples to strawberries, which was labor intensive. So getting back to, we went through all the voting records, through all the elections, and were able to look at all the Spanish surnames as opposed to the non-Spanish surnames. So we could look at voter participation in those elections. So we were able to create profiles of no internet, right? And we had to do this all by going through the books and looking through the voting rosters. So it was highly detailed, highly time extensive, but we were able to also look at who voted after the election by Spanish surname. And so we were able to look at precincts that were majority, and I'll call it, so I can just for this conversation, Spanish surname, that had majority Spanish surname voter, and people that voted with Spanish surnames. And those what led to, when we created a map, again without the internet, for district elections, those districts created the majority Latino issues that became Districts 1 and Districts 2, which Karina was elected to represent. And so we were able to look highly at those data and details, and it was through volunteers and through MALDEF and such, and we went through the historical records, we went through the county. Remember, there was something called microfiche, which I'm not going to explain to anybody, because it went out with carbon paper, but again. But these were all the challenges that we had at that time to be able to look at that kind of data. And a lot of public interviews that Paule did and others, to be able to look at that. We built a case with data. We built a factual case that we could take to the court. And granted, we lost at the district level. This case lost at the district level and won at the appellate Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
The demonic Ninth.
The demonic Ninth, yes.
In this administration,
Yes. Correct. So we prepared, we had that chance at the first, where we lost in the district. And by the way, the first Latino that was elected to the city council testified against us. And he was also the first Latino elected to the county board of supervisors. He testified against us. No, I don't want to mention Tony Compton's name, because that would just be wrong, put him in a bad light. Oh, okay. So he testified against us as other Latinos testified against us in court, right? And so we were somewhat a little defeated at first, but it was really amazing, because one of my Joaquin Avila stories is he was more excited than anybody because he realized that we were going to take this to the appellate court, and that's where the case was going to be. So it took a lot of painstaking research by hand, by commitment hours, and a lot of input from the community to make it happen.
Thank you, Daniel. And I'm going to take as I said, this gentleman created that data. He crunched all those numbers. And as I'll explain now as I discuss the case, it really is what won the case. I'd like to start the discussion of the case, and sometimes I'm going to read some legal stuff only because it's really nice to hear what the court had to say in their own words. You know we won, okay, but I'd like to start it with a statement, and the statement is, we all have a vested interest in assuring a vibrant and dynamic body politic. The political integration of all communities is essential to maintain the legitimacy of our Republican form of government. That's what we're about today. That's it in a nutshell. And that was the credo of Joaquin G. Avila, the lead attorney in the case. Harvard Law.
I got it mixed up.
And after the case, he was awarded the MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, the Genius Grant, in 1996, and he helped draft the 2001 California Voting Rights Act. So we had a really, really good attorney there. Watsonville had district elections until 1952. Don't know how many of you knew that. In 1985, they were still having just one big district, and a federal lawsuit was filed challenging that. The trial was held January 1987, and at the end of that trial, the city won and ordered attorney fees be paid by the plaintiffs. Yes, and so the appeal came, and the case was decided in 1988, and the defendant city had been incorporated as a town since 1868 and had 1,000 people in Watsonville when it incorporated into a town. By the 1980s, it had grown to over 24,000 people. And since 1952 and through the 1980s, they elected their council members and mayor on a single district basis. And the plaintiffs were Watsonville voting residents, which have already been described as Cruz Gomez, Patricia Leal, and Waldo Rodriguez. And I'd like to also, while I mention Waldo's name again, acknowledge Isaac Rodriguez in the crowd, his son. And 15 years after I first met him, Waldo was still active in the community. And the plaintiffs claim that the city had violated, by having these at-large elections, had violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, in that it lessened the opportunities of Hispanics, Latinos, Spanish surnames, Spanish speakers, whatever you want to call us. They weren't getting their fair shake. That's what it boiled down to. The words in the code are to participate in the political process and elect representatives of their choice. That had never happened in Watsonville. The city won at the federal trial court, and the parties appealed. The parties stipulated to most of the facts, most of those facts which Daniel just mentioned, and they challenged the court, saying that it had inappropriately applied the wrong legal standard in reviewing their case. The 1965 Voting Rights Act was amended in 1982 and replaced what was called the intent. You had to deliberately intend to discriminate against somebody. And that, having tried cases during that, is really hard to prove that. And Congress acknowledged that and changed it into what they call the results test. What were the results of your actions? Since discriminatory intent was so hard to prove, under the new test, the plaintiff had to prove that based on everything, the totality of the circumstances, that the electoral process was not equally open to participation by members of a racial or language minority. In that, the members had less opportunity than other members to participate in the political process and to elect their representatives of their choice. That was the law as Congress wrote it, and that was the time at which the Congress was enforcing and strengthening the Voting Rights Act. The status of it today would be the discussion for many more panels. The Court of Appeals was fortunate to have, and so were the plaintiffs, to have a unanimous Supreme Court decision interpreting those sections of the Voting Rights Act just the year before. In 1986, after the case was initially filed, but before the trial, the Supreme Court decided a case called Thornburg versus Gingles. And in that case, a challenge was brought by black voters to the redistricting plan that had been adopted by North Carolina's General Assembly. Some of you may know North Carolina is still trying to get it right. Here, let me pause for a second to acknowledge the excellent work that was done by the attorneys for those black plaintiffs in the Thornburg case and other cases dating back to before Brown versus Board of Education. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund did a masterful job of lawyering and continues to do that today. Joaquin Avila and MALDEF continued that proud tradition. The Watsonville case had so many parallels to the Gingles case that all you had to do practically, not practically, it wasn't that simple legally, but you substituted Latino for black and you had your roadmap. And that was the roadmap that Joaquin used, and that was not used by the trial court, but the appellate court used that and overturned the initial decision. The Supreme Court noted that, and this is their language, that when you want to look at one of these claims, you want to do a searching, practical evaluation of the past and present reality, and on a functional view of the political process. How does it really work? And the court said that you had to prove three things. The first one was that the minority group had to be able to demonstrate that it was sufficiently large, yet relatively compact, so that it could exist and create a single district. Second, it had to be politically cohesive. And third, you had to demonstrate something called racial bloc voting. Basically, that the way the whites voted, you could never win if you had a minority candidate running. And so the court said, when you look at these things, what you really want to look at is the extent to which minority group members have been elected in the past, and the extent to which the voting in the state or political subdivision is racially polarized. So using the Thornburg case as a guide, he went on to analyze the city electoral process. And the first criteria was the geographic concentration of Hispanics. Looking at the map, and a similar map was presented, not with internet and nice graphics like this, but it proved and showed the same obvious fact. And so the district court found that the Hispanics were not geographically compact, because if you were going to make a district, the plaintiffs had only asked to make 2 districts, and it left out the other 5 areas, so that couldn't be fair. And the court said, no, that's not how it works. Okay? The district court found that because the plan would alleviate only voter dilution for 1/3 of the eligible voters, that they had not been shown to be geographically compact. The appellate court said, wrong. The fact that there are members of the minority group outside of the minority district is immaterial. All that is required is that the minority group be sufficiently large and geographically compact to constitute a majority in a single district. That's simple. That's the golden rubric. So the court ruled that was clear error on the part of the judge that ruled otherwise, and said, Gomez, you get prong 1. Prong 2 was the political cohesiveness of the group. And even though the court found that 95% of the voters in the heavily Hispanic precincts supported Hispanic candidates, and the Hispanic candidates ranked Hispanic candidates first or tied, he didn't find political cohesiveness. He said that because no significant number of eligible Hispanics had voted in elections under consideration, the Hispanic community as a whole was too apathetic to be politically cohesive. The appellate court again said wrong, and directed the court to use the correct standard, that the court had erred by focusing on the low minority voter registration and turnout as evidence that they were not politically cohesive. The trial court should have only looked at the actual voting patterns, rather than trying to speculate as to reasons why so many Hispanics were apathetic. And as Paule mentioned, there are a long list of other reasons, so did the other panelists, in terms of frustration with past failures and the like. The appellate court noted that since the district court found that predominantly Hispanics sections of the town had actual elections, demonstrated a near unanimous for support that the requisite political cohesiveness was found. Then they had one hurdle left, and this one, which took a lot of data to support, the racial bloc voting. And racial bloc voting is when a white bloc vote that normally will defeat the combined strength of minority support plus white crossover votes. So no matter how hard you try as a minority candidate, you will never be able to defeat, given the patterns, you will never be able to defeat the white candidates. So the court said when you look at that, you want to look at this over time. And they found in Giggles that a series of elections in which no minorities were ever elected was indicative of racial bloc voting. And they said Watsonville is the same as the Giggles case. Prong number 3, Gomez, you get number 3 also. And that such a strong pattern over time strongly indicates racial bloc voting. So the Court of Appeals then sums it up by saying, where the record on appeal permits only one resolution of the factual issue, only one. The facts were so obvious and so well laid out that there was only one resolution that as a matter of law they could only come to. We have a judge with us today, and
Your Honor.
and she knows how hard it is to, as a matter of law, make a determination on any set of facts. And that's what the appellate court did, that infamous Ninth Circuit. And they said that regardless of the good faith of city officials, and that was a big point that was made, that, hey, City officials, my client, the city, has not done anything. You know, they've been pure as the Germans know. But the court said, regardless of the good faith of city officials, Watsonville's system is an impermissible obstacle to the ability of Hispanics to participate effectively in the political process. Attorney fees awarded to Gomez, Leal, and Rodriguez. The rest is history. The case has been cited at least 44 times that I found in voting rights case. And I'd like Daniel to explain a little bit more about how it was to be part of that and what happened when that process finally got that decision.
In the trenches, what about the dirt?
Oh, no, I couldn't sell out. Even if people aren't here anymore, I couldn't tell you all the turds. But Raby Hill is a fun guy, and I miss that guy. I missed all of them. Robert Chakanaka, who ran for mayor, the first Native American who ran for mayor here in the city of Watsonville, Juan Morales, and others. And Waldo Rodriguez also, they ran for school board, which is really significant for me on a personal level, because Waldo issued that challenge, which allowed my son and members of his generation to get to the elected office. So I think what was kind of missing too is the city of Watsonville was intent on fighting this lawsuit and authorized almost $1 million, I think it was 800,000 something, to continue fighting this at the Supreme Court level. They took that vote and passed it. So they went kicking and screaming, so to speak. I think what was really interesting is that I think that was the first multiracial coalition of folks that I participated with. I know what a lot of folks from old Watsonville will say about me and such like that, and maybe half of it's true, but I think that was what was really interesting when you talk about being in the trenches. I think it was a real communal celebration when we got to that point, even a little bit of a disbelief. And as Paula was making a list of folks, we had people all over town running. We had been activists and organizers for so long, we didn't know what to do when we won, which could be said a lot in the Latino community on occasion. So in answering that, I think it was an excitement for some of us to go to the court hearings, at the district level in particular. We were part of it, and yet we were like, you had to wait for news then. It wasn't instant and popped up on your phone. So it was really when that decision came down at the appellate court level, and then it was appealed, and then it was denied cert, which means the Supreme Court of the United States authorized the appellate court level? Is that
They reviewed the case and refused to review it because they thought it was so well decided.
Correct. So, it's kind of weird celebrating, yay, we proved that they discriminated against us. Because we all knew that. But as in reference to what Karina was saying, that was happening all over agricultural communities throughout the state of California, the same challenge. And so after that decision came down at the Supreme Court level, the city of Watsonville, if I remember correctly, kind of gave up. They're like, the heck with it, whatever map you want to use, we're tired of dealing with you guys. Which is why Watsonville I bring that up, is because that's why Watsonville went to 7 districts instead of 6 districts and a mayor at large, which happened in the city of Salinas. Because of the Watsonville case, Salinas was already moving along, challenging the at-large election system in Watsonville, which allowed a few of us to work with Jesse Sanchez and others in the Salinas community, and they settled their case, and chose 6th district with an at-large mayor in the city of Salinas.
They didn't have the money.
That's what yes. Yeah. And so it was an expensive fine.
Was there 7?
We have 7 districts. We went to 7 districts, and 2 were created with a super Latino majority. Again, by all the numbers of counting everybody, right? That doesn't mean other districts weren't 40 or 50%, but the percentage that we're referencing to were voters, which means they're American citizens that fell into the Spanish surname category. So it was exciting. I think we didn't know what to do when we ran, at first, because we weren't used to winning, and so which meant everybody was cohesive, now split up into different camps, right? Which tends to exist politically in Watsonville today, I've been associated with Cruz and I'm very proud of that fact. Others were associated. I ran against Oscar Rios in the first campaign district election, very proud of that. We also had a time period where our rejoicement was very short-lived because in the middle of the court-ordered election, something happened called the Loma Prieta earthquake.
And Paule, if you could pick up on the community's reaction to the decision and your observations.
Okay. And I want to make a couple of comments about some of the items that came up. One about the apathy that, again, this was part of that ideology that I was mentioning, that is used as a tool of oppression, to tell people that the reason why you don't have, any power and the resources that come with it is because of your own apathy. And it's fascinating when you listen to the rationales, right, as to the status quo. And one of the issues that would come up is the issue that we had a large number of Latino residents who were not citizens and therefore could not vote. And that was used as one more justification for why we didn't have any power. It's because we have so many people who haven't seen, who's actually lived here for 20-some years and more years, and they haven't chosen to become citizens, and therefore they don't respect political institutions. But what it really begged, if you listen to that explanation, what it begs is the question as to why any candidate of any racialized background should have to depend on voters of their own racial background. If there is no polarized racialized voting, you should not have to rely on Latinos or any other people of color, to be able to get your candidate elected. And so it really begs that question, okay, so even if there were a significant number of, Latinos who could not vote, who are not citizens, why are we dependent on having only Latinos vote for Latino candidates? Why is it that non-Latino voters would not vote for a Latino candidate? So it really begs that question, right? I would also say that, the issue about that we all knew that racism existed, right? And that we had to take this case to court, etc. But I spent about 20-some years as a professor and lecturer at UC San Diego and UCLA. And what I told my students in my various classes, they would come in and say, we know there's racism. And I would say, how is it manifested? And they would not be able to answer that question. They just knew that there was racism. And we knew that there was racism here in Watsonville and in the Central Valley where there's still a lot to do and everything else. But that's not good enough, okay? I see some young people here, taking notes, and that's great because there's everything to do. And data-driven is great. Sometimes that data is going to be thrown out the door. They don't give a damn that you have data, okay? If you have it, but you have to have it still. But what I'm saying here is that even though we know, you have to document it. You have to concretely document it. And going and doing interviews and getting people's opinions about this is not sufficient. It's good. It adds, flesh to the bones. But you have to get that, if it's voting rights data, if it is, policies, if it's the amount of money that the municipal governments are spending on different kinds of people-centered programs, as I think of it, you have to document that, okay? Because it's not good enough that we know it, okay? I would also say that in terms of one of the parts of the research that I did was looking at the question of, does it make one damn bit of difference if we get district elections, okay? Because we had fought for this, okay? And we were saying, yes, it does, but it's just like this other question. You have to be able to concretely, provide the evidence that it either did or did not, okay? You can't just assume it. And just getting people of color, or just getting women, or just getting people of poor backgrounds, into municipal government or into any position, if it's teachers and that, does not necessarily mean that you're going to now have a more progressive agenda,
Exactly.
right? So in many ways, I came here, I didn't give a damn about Latinos getting into office in one sense of the word. What I did give a damn about, and what you had mentioned, is about representatives of choice, of the voters' choice, right? And so, again, I would say that, what the district elections then did for us is that it allowed then folks to be able to, the first election, and you ran that first one, okay? I would say that when I came here, and any other city I've ever been in, you don't have Latinos or African Americans that are all cohesive. You don't. This is another thing that people use against you too. You're not a cohesive bunch, all right? So no one is, big deal. But then when this lawsuit came forward, you had numbers of those different groups. I don't know if it was factions maybe, who then came together recognizing that this would, that this would really push us forward. And so people from those different camps did run for office. We weren't cohesive then. When they came into office, did we know what to do and didn't know what to do? Governance is tough. Governance is not for the faint of heart. Okay, and many people come into it not knowing that maybe, and maybe it's a good thing. Or else maybe fewer people would do it. But I would say governance is not easy, and you have finite budgets, so you can't do everything that you want to do. But at the time, so the first election, what happened, we don't get a majority of Latinos on the council, even though we could have had because of the people running. But what we did have, and why this was seen as a success, is because we had Todd McFerrin, we had Par Eves, we had folks who had worked, who were our representatives of choice. Okay? Who had worked, who had actually worked, and he was new. He didn't know, he just popped in there, he didn't know, he had been working on these issues, but he'd been a teacher, and, so it allowed also for newcomers who hadn't been part of this to also get in, But anyway, so the first group that got in, what we did do is we achieved a majority of folks who were of liberal and progressive ideology. That was the majority that we had on the council the first time that the Watsonville elections, the district elections allowed, okay? Very, very critical. And so part of that study I did on do district elections make one damn bit of difference? Again, concrete data, okay? Before the elections, and part of that mobilization I talked about by the community members, okay? Rebecca Garcia, Celia Organista, and others, they had for several years been working for a 25% housing inclusionary ordinance, okay? How do we get affordable housing? How do we get housing for migrant workers, okay? And they had, Rebecca at that time had just gotten her teacher credentials, okay? She comes from a family of agriculturalists, okay? Irrigators in the field. She had been a hairdresser for most of her adult life at that point, okay? Celia Organista, who graduated out of my high school in Laredo, Texas, on the border, okay? And had come up here in a busload of women as migrant workers to work in the fields, okay? After the Minnesota program had, dissipated. These women, okay, who did not have, Rebecca just newly minted, and others who did not have a PhD, did not go to UC Santa Cruz, they were just beginning, okay? But folks without formal education, but absolutely brilliant, and did the hard work of learning about housing and inclusionary ordinances and what it takes to get the government to adopt it or not, and put the people together. And when those district elections happened, okay, was when we got that 25% housing inclusionary ordinance, okay? When we got that, when the district elections happened, so it doesn't make one damn bit of difference, okay? We got community policing, okay, in the neighborhoods. We got, I don't know if you still have it, but we got bilingual translation. You didn't have to call and remember to call and then ask the city to have a bilingual. We got bilingual translation, okay, in City Hall and for all different kinds of things. There are a number. We got more funding, okay, this is like, I went to interview who became the first Latino, okay, Carlos Palacio, city manager, eventually, okay? When he was still not manager, I went and interviewed him. He had just come and I said, what does a people-centric budget look like, municipal budget look like? One that is focused on people, And he said, I've never been asked that question before. But that's what we were looking at. So, I was looking at, community funding for organizations, okay, supporting community members, and if it was childcare, etc. That went up significantly than what it had been prior to the district elections. So I was able to, even though friends who had been working for the MALDEF lawsuit, because you don't get everything, okay, and you have to keep struggling, okay, to get more, and sometimes it goes backwards. We're in a backwards era right now, okay, and you have to be struggling to get what you had, okay, but some of our friends working on the MALDEF, right, said after we got in some of our first elected officials, some of us and more Latinos, they said, damn, we got people in there who are not really representing our interests, and is this what we fought for? Is this what we fought for? And so some of them would say, because cynicism protects us. It protects us, cynicism protects us, from fear of failure and all that, right? And so some of them would retreat back to cynicism and say, you know what, after all that, it didn't matter, and that is why it was important to also concretely provide that evidence, how it mattered in policy ways, in resource allocation, also in attitudes of people, which also do matter, although it's not enough to get just their opinions. I went and interviewed folks who had been part of the city residents who actively worked against the MALDEF lawsuit, okay? Some of them at the time saying, well, you all don't have any qualifications, really afraid of Oscar Rios, because of the strike, etc. But afraid of Todd McLaren, okay, because he was progressive, okay? But saying, I really didn't support you all because I was afraid, this was one of the city persons who'd been in the city over 30 years, I was really afraid that once you all came into office that you would bankrupt the city. What I said to that person, wonderful person, I said the only persons that were going to bankrupt the city was what Dan had said, and that is that they took a vote that would actually have, emptied the coffers of the city to try to press it to the Supreme Court, all right? And then that same person said, once I had to work alongside Oscar and Todd and Parr, I discovered, now this is the big one, this is when you do the drum rolls, right? I discovered that they wanted just what we wanted. That is how basic and fundamental this stuff is. Okay, and that is how hard we have to work to get to that understanding, that primarily most people want what others want. They just want a decent life. Do you want to be a millionaire? Nice. But that's not what people are really motivated by, And that was someone who had actively worked against, our efforts and all the other efforts about discrimination.
Thank you. Karina, you, as Paule said, were one of the ones that did that dive into that pool. And can you describe for us sort of your experience and the impact of district elections on your life? And then I know you also are very much into policy, and on top of that, if you could add in discussion of sort of the policy implications of district elections on local and state functions.
I can try to do that. Yes, so I just want to very quickly just revisit my involvement in one of my first political campaigns here in the community of Watsonville. because I do think, I had a little bit of hesitancy about participating on this panel because I wasn't there. A lot of the framing around this panel was those that are in the front line, those that were part of this legal fight and legal battle. But I also understand the importance of also being an observer and a listener of that history. And I do feel that my introduction to this legal fight and this struggle for access to the ballot and equal access to the ballot was because I had the opportunity to work with Daniel Dodge. He was someone who taught me how to read my first precinct list. And I walked many precincts with Maria Gittin, who many of you know her history in the civil rights struggle as well. So I had the opportunity to work with a lot of these folks. So when you think about history, and I was a recent college graduate, you still sort of think about it as something that was a long time ago, something that was static. But here we were, still living out many of the tensions in the community that, the cannery strikes, this legal challenge, everything it evoked, we were still living it in my first campaign when I got involved in 2004. And that challenge there was trying to win a progressive majority on the local school board. And it wasn't until many years later that I would even see a Latina. In 2012, two Latinas, Dr. Lupe Rivas and Maria Orozco, get elected to the local school board as well. But that first sort of local battle for myself, entering into it, and it's very real. Part of the experience when we talk about the political factions, I had no idea what I was walking into and what and who I was going to be pegged with and whose political team and what side I was going to be on, no idea. I mean, my involvement was really, I just wanted people to have the necessary information to make informed choices when they're voting. And so for me, it was really about, getting out there, walking door to door, talking to community members, letting them ask questions about the political process, letting them ask about where to vote, and me knowing how to access that information for them. That was my first sort of introduction into Watsonville politics, but in that immersion, I did learn about Dolores Cruz Gomez, and I'll be the first to admit, when I heard Cruz Gomez and my own sort of bias that I've internalized, I thought it was a man who had fought for this legal battle, had put their body on the line to try to access, voting rights for Latinos here in the city of Watsonville. And it was very ignorant on my part not to know that part of history, but here I was, learning it. And I also know that she was somebody who ran for office, didn't win, but at the same time, because she did all that, I was able to then run years later and be able to have access to sit up on that dais. So I think this education and being observers to living history and learning from folks that were there is critical because community organizing is very frustrating. And there is a lot that inspires you to jump in, but there's less inspiration to stay in it. And so when you learn about people's consistency, people's perseverance, people's courage to just keep fighting. Some of the local battles just don't seem that large. When I think about some of the others had to go through and others had to confront. So I think organizing educational events like this, you're going to see many of the students that you shared with me the photos walking through the arts gallery. They're going to be the ones stepping in to run, no doubt about it. I think as my time as mayor, one of the things I was really always happy to see was all the school tours that would come to the Civic Plaza and tour our city council chambers, have the opportunity to meet their council members and their mayor. But one of the things that I always made sure that they did when they walked in was to spend some time staring at those photos that are out there in the hallway. And, one of the big questions here is, did district elections even matter? Did it make an impact? And you can see, I think Maria described it. This changed the face of Watsonville. And the students see it immediately when you ask them there. I ask them to count. How many women have served as mayors in your community? I ask them, how many look like you? And you get different answers. Some none, they're all old. So you don't hear that. My picture included. All of those things. But I think that this education, this living history is important because that's where you're going to see your next generation of representatives emerge from. And I think that's also where you're going to see your representatives that are community-focused and community-centric. Because that is another question you grapple with when you're governing. It is, what does community-oriented city government look like? Which is one of the questions you posed in your paper. When you have limited resources, when you have every possible critic, now on social media, that when you have all of that, that is a question that you always have to return to when you're governing. Your personal story is an important one, but you also need to examine the entire community and what's going on locally, what's going on statewide. And I think for myself, what it meant to be community-centered and what it meant to have an opportunity to serve on that dais was also about disruption and interruption of what I still perceive to be very racist attitudes toward poor people in our community and vulnerable people in our community. And you hear it, I, again, didn't serve that long ago. Last year was 2016, but when you have conversations about, businesses coming into town, you hear the denigrating comments against Mexican food restaurants, and because I had a platform, I would put an end to it. Also, in terms of where the city invested their resources, everybody wants to see a beautiful community, clean up blight. There are structural interventions that as a city you can pursue, so you can reinvest in parts of your community that have been ignored. But what I heard coming from the dais was that people wanted to, ramp up enforcement actions and those enforcement actions go after the people living in the homes, not the people that own the homes. And so you have a lot of issues there because a lot of tenants are not responsible for the upkeep of many of the properties. It should be the landlords that are maintaining those properties. And so that's also something that you could disrupt. Rather than ramp up enforcement, you just redirect the conversation to look for other ways that you can make larger scale investment in blighted areas of your community. And one of the last things that I sort of want to just touch upon too, because I hear a lot of conversation now with the implementation of a road diet in our downtown. And again, I had the opportunity to represent the downtown. And those conversations have been going on for a very long time. It's not a new conversation. Reinvestment in our downtown is not a new conversation. That visioning process has been going on for a very long time. But I do feel that it has overtones, again, what I tried to disrupt during my time on the council. Because you're asking about, is it worth investing in your downtown? Is it, how do we revitalize decaying downtown? That's also something that I hear. But as someone who lived just a block away from the plaza, for me, I was always saying, it's already a vibrant downtown. It's already alive. It's already full of our entrepreneurs that because previous city council members had the foresight to put in Plaza Vigil, partner with the Pajaro CDC, you have a lot of entrepreneurs that are there, you know, trying to upstart their businesses. And the other issue there is, you know, there's already a lot of people walking to and from work, bus. People are already walking and improving, if you think about it, like increasing your walkability score in your downtown. So all of that's going on, but it's the city's responsibility to protect your residents of your downtown. It's your responsibility to make sure that there's business hubs that can thrive in your downtown. So yes, talk about opportunities for new businesses to come in and thrive in your downtown, but also think about how do you stabilize the downtown so that the existing businesses can also enjoy and part of that new growth that you're aiming to achieve. So I would just say, you know, for the existing council members, you know, just be sure that you are disrupting those kinds of connotations and discussion about what is going on in downtown, because again, it's already very much alive. It just needs reinvestment by the city and by the state.
I'd like to, in our last segment, have our panelists sort of take a few minutes and tell you whatever they want to tell you about this. You know, what the effect of this case was on them, which they've touched on, significance, anything else they'd like to draw out. And we'll have a question and answer session after that. Daniel, I'll let you go first.
Anything?
Careful.
Okay. First of all, again, I'm very honored to be here. I have 1,000 thoughts and that I'll recall later after this is all over, of things that I wish I said. I see family members and members in my circle, you know, that I'm really happy to be able to, that they're present today with me. But I'll differ a little bit from my good friend and one of my heroes, Paule. Like, I
have a chance to go after you.
I know you do, that's why I was kind of hesitant.
I said about that way.
Yeah, I recognize that too. I became involved in this because I come from a labor background. I come from the Chicano movement, and even that's a source of controversy inside our own community. I had a non-Anglo identity of self since I was in elementary school. But for me, this was about Latino political empowerment. And there were none of us in the room, and there was none of us present in making kind of any decisions on a governmental level in 1988. That's just, again, data and facts and such. So working with a coalition of white folks that were here in the Pajaro Valley was very interesting. We didn't use the term progressive. I think they called those folks liberals at that time, you know. And also in dealing with that time too, you know, we had to deal with liberal racism. You know, our good friends from the northern end of the county that, you know, would tell us what you guys need. You know, and we're still dealing with that. We're still dealing with that here in this community with a weird coalition of agriculture and non-growth folks. Many land use issue battles have been fought pertaining to South County. We still don't have a general plan. But I'll save those for after Paula comes after me. But I will say the thing about district elections that I feel proud about is that what the norm is in Watsonville is not the normal in other communities. I had the honor to be, man, I love being a county worker. I got paid every Wednesday. I had health insurance because I worked a union job. Yeah, you know, I was low riding hard with all the homies and shit, you know. And so I have street cred still to this day, where, you know. So like, for me to enter in after that phase of the cannery strike, it was a whole different world. I went to Santa Clara University using my workman's comp because I lost use of my left arm. And I graduated from the School of Law and the paralegal program. And so when Joaquin and Willie came into this, I was like, man, that's empowerment. That's what my people, my community needs and existed to be able to have access to. So when district elections came into play, I certainly agree with like the 25% number that Paule was talking about. Man, that's high. That's high for the state of any city in the state of California for affordable housing. We should be telling Google that over there in the Santa Clara County right now, what's going on. That was here first. The translation battle, I passed an article around for folks to see because it fell on me when I was looking for something else this morning. You know, some other articles. That was a big deal. Like, oh my God, they're going to be speaking Spanish in a public meeting. What the hell's happening here, right? You know? And that was a big deal, and that was what that liberal city council put into place. And now it's the norm. Now we accept it as a norm. There was a shooting on 2nd Street in front of the daycare center down there in Mariner Ridge Park. And several of us from the community came and said, no, we don't want to be busting all the homies and the cholos and this and that. We want things for them to do so that we can have preventive programs in place. And that was the beginning of what community policing, people come up and hug the police chief here now, you know? That don't happen in normal communities, right? You know? The police force recruits through the local kids here to become a part of that. So you have an investment in community, right? Recycle. When I was chair of the planning commission and we went to recycle efforts, we outpaced the city of Santa Cruz, and they said, well, you know, Daniel, those Mexicans, they don't know how to do that. You know, and I got the brunt of all these things. I wish I could share them with you, you know, like zero population growth, and said Watsonville's population would be easy if all those Mexicans quit having babies. Those things were real, and by the way, I contribute to the proliferation of that raza here with 7 grandchildren now. But, you know, these things, we argued over these things, the direction of government changed in Watsonville, and it's still leading the way. We fought Walmart annexating and coming into our community, I don't know, 90-something, you know, when it was talked about in Pajaro, because we knew what the effective it would be. We were able to be a sanctuary city before it was even a phrase, you know. These are things that district elections, and then look at all the county boards across, all the county boards, because of Joaquin's work, Joaquin went to the Pajaro Valley Unified School District, and now it's districts. We went to the Cruz College Board, and now it's districts, you know. So we were able to change whole institutions, you know. I like to tell people I used to fight City Hall, and then when I became mayor, you know, I came down here one night, and I went to the side, and I used my key, and the door opened. So then I went to the elevator, and I used my key, and it took me up to the 4th floor. And then I went to the city council chamber, the back door where the offices are, and I opened it up, and it opened up. So I went and sat with the mayor's office for about 20 minutes, and the cops didn't come. And I thought, wow. This is a reality that somebody, and I've heard Joaquin say it, that, you know, I must have done something right because Daniel Dodge got to be mayor, you know. I thought, is that a compliment or not? Anyways, you know, I just wanted to be able to say those kind of things because so many people opened doors whose names we're not going to say tonight, you know. Ma Cobos, you know. And some other folks that were involved in a lot of different things, you know. I wish I could say all the people that were involved. You know, we still have our issues here in Watsonville pertaining with land. You know, we've had a small group of, you know, I don't want to insult my good friends from Santa Cruz, but by calling them liberal racists again. But they continuously, like, you know, battle us on land use issues, and we haven't been able to expand. We gave up going west of Highway 1. This is my personal opinion, Pat. This is not anybody else's. We gave up building west of Highway 1 to the ocean when all communities that are along the coast want to build all the way to the ocean. We in Watsonville gave that up because we needed a 3rd high school because our high school was impacted by over 1,000 extra kids, right? So yes, do we have our challenges in Watsonville? Yes. Did we change the world? Well, California is the world, isn't it? Watsonville, you know, has been the center of it, and I'm proud to have been part of those actions. Like I said, there's a million other things that I probably want to say. I'm really happy that, see, for me too, when Karina Cervantez became mayor, you know, that was just like, you know, that was monumental. That was just really like the things that we wanted to do to have leaders like that. And with the young mayor that we have today, who's from here in the city of Watsonville, those are what district elections opted to do, in my opinion, you know. I loved Paule Reeves and my good friend Lowell Hurst, who's that picture I passed around. If that's Lowell in the black and white picture with black hair. Lowell has been, like I like to tease him, he's the only person up there from 2 centuries on the mayor wall. You know, so I think we've had a change in what our children are accepting as the norm. You know, being able to go to movies out in the park at night, you know, in the summer, to be able to have the science lab down here. Those are things that Cruz Gomez and Waldo Rodriguez opened the door, and they didn't know it existed, and have been able to affect hundreds, if not thousands of people. And so that's my reflection on it.
I am a Chicana Latina activist scholar, and now I also have my own company. I co-own a company to do that municipal ID card work that I had mentioned earlier. Went outside of the university to do that. When you are involved in these kinds of actions and these kinds of opportunities, you are never the same. When you have a win, and I had experienced that somewhat before I came to Watsonville, because I was tutored by my political mentors, were folks in the cities of Richmond and Oakland, who had already got a state law that prevented hospitals from dumping patients. And so the public health folks were some of my first political mentors. And then I asked the question, because I was not young like you when I first came into, you know, being active in politics. I was already in my early 30s, just turned 30, 31. But I asked that question, and I say that because I had arrived at that age wrapped in my cynicism, okay, which I see as protective of many people's, right? And so, you know, because we're assaulted from the times, for many of us, and depending on one's community, many of us are assaulted from the times we're very young, very children, in so many different ways. And so wrapping yourself in that kind of cynicism is a protective coat. And so being able to get engaged was the gradual, you know, removal of that coat of cynicism. But I did that going and asking that question, okay, to my elders, folks that I deemed as my elders. And those were elders across sort of racial and class backgrounds. Some of those elders were here again, they were up in the Bay Area, but they were, and I asked that question, how do you all, and you've been active since the 30s and the 40s, because these were old folks at that time, like I'm arriving at, how did you all stay active despite all the losses we had? And we used to lose a lot more. You know, despite the losses, how do you stay in it decade after decade after decade? Because I had already seen and was reading, you know, from folks who in the 60s who had, you know, been progressives or radicals, and now they were conservatives working against our groups, right? You know, and so I said, how do you stay in this, you know, despite all the setbacks, etc., and then when we don't win? And I learned by them. One of those persons was a woman, she was already in her 70s at that time, Florence Wyckoff. Many of you may or may not know her, but Florence had been working on migrant, and these were prior to even Mexican migrant workers, right? Because our migrant workers were white folks, you know, Southwestern migrants and others, even some Jamaicans made it here, you know, from early on. But she had been appointed by the Truman administration to work on health issues, okay, for migrant workers because of the work she'd been doing. And so that's how long ago, and that was ancient history for me then, you know. And so I was asking, how do you stay in this? I asked some of the community organizers, okay, Mike Harold, who was one of my contemporaries, okay, and he was a community organizer sent by PICO up in Oakland to do organizing here. The churches, a whole group of different churches, you know, had asked for a community organizer to come here. He was the second one that had been sent here, okay, and I asked him also because of his experience. He was, like I said, younger than I, but he had been more experienced. And, you know, and they gave me some very good sage advice, you know. That's what I wanted to know. How do you stay in it? Well, now, 30-some years later, I'm still at it, you know, in many different ways. And I learned that by asking my elders, you know, like, how do you stay in this? But winning is fantastic. Okay? Winning is fantastic. When I was teaching at UC San Diego and UCLA, I had many students from the Central Valley. I had a Chicana Mujer group, and I would send them to the Bay Area up here, okay, to be able to experience. They had a better chance of winning, okay, policy-wise and otherwise, health policy, art, etc. I sent them up to the Bay Area, or I say the Bay Area, Northern California, because they had a better chance because of the electorates also, especially Alameda County and other counties. You know, they would have a better chance of winning. And I knew that if they were involved in health policy or anything else and they won, you know, whatever that was, they would never be the same. I was never the same after that health law. And then coming here to Watsonville, it allowed me to really concretely, evidence-based, you know, knowledge about the power of people, everyday people. You know, that having not been involved, I would not really have that repertoire, you know, that I have. And be able to pass it on, you know, the generations that I've been able to pass it on to. So never the same. Daniel and I don't think we disagree, at least not about those things. But I would say that what Daniel was also is referring to, which is still, I'm not surprised, you know, manifests itself, is that it's not just the white liberal, right, Santa Cruz based, but, and you see in other places, it's also rural, you know, agriculture, rural, you know, versus urban, you know, there you have a university too, you know, and it's that kind of, it's almost like classed in that way, right, our occupation. And so it was like, we're going to teach the bumpkins, the country bumpkins, right, because we have more experience, right, and done in a kind way, maybe, or but it is patronizing, and that was part of what I saw also here. I would say that, so there's learning, you know, on all parts, right? But what was accomplished here, it made a difference. It made a difference, you know, not just because we had now, you know, Latino faces, you know. And when I say that, I don't give a damn, really, you know, on one level, that if it's Latinos in there, or women, or people from poor backgrounds, it's almost rhetorical in some ways, but I'm saying what is really more important, okay? Racial barriers exist, and they existed, okay? And smashing them is critical, okay? To really get a true democracy, right? People, for all people. But I would say that and they exist. So the whole idea that class really trumps race, etc., you know, something I've always worked actively against, because in many places, in many circumstances, you know, there's that class, you would say class racism as well. But, so that is critical. Breaking those racial ceilings, breaking those gender ceilings, you know, breaking those class ceilings is very important. But what we were able to accomplish here doesn't mean that, you know, there's not more to do, and you're part of that, you know, that effort to continue to do more. I don't have enough lifetime, and none of us do, you know, to do all the things I would love to do, and to be able to keep working on so many of these things. I have been in the Central Valley. The Central Valley is critical. There are so many things to do for the next generations. You know, I'm looking for those students who are going to do the history of the Chicano movement, going through the health systems, And that was critical in the Central Valley, okay, and it was critical in the urban areas like in Oakland and other places as well. It was another way in which that whole movement happened, right? There's everything that needs to be done. And, and so I'm part of that now, like I mentioned, and if any of you are interested in this part as well, we have been working for 12 years, starting in New Haven, on a municipal ID card program to get folks who cannot get a state ID or the driver's license, etc., to get them ID because it means that they cannot get access to resources. That's all just been part of this. It's all sort of folded into each other, into all the different issues. If you want more information on that, I would love to come to Watsonville and have a Watsonville City ID card, for any of those persons. We're talking about people coming out of prisons. We're talking about at-risk kids who leave home. We're talking about homeless folks. We're talking about elderly who don't drive or don't fly anymore. Special education, young adults so that they can get jobs, so they can have ID when they present ID. So there's everything to do, and I'm looking forward to your PhD dissertation, as part of that ongoing struggle.
Karina, can you give us your observations and comments?
I won't add too much because I do want to hear and get questions from folks that took time out of their day to join us this afternoon. But I do think, for myself, I've taken a little break from political life. And I think it's great to be watching from the outside and learning as much as possible. There is, as you mentioned, a lot left to be done. It is a little bit, it's devastating to see what's happening at the national level. I do think because we've gone through a lot of the anti-immigrant, not that it's not here still in California, but because a lot of that anti-immigrant sentiment came about in the late 80s, early 90s. Many of the elected leaders are children of immigrants who were impacted by that anti-immigrant sentiment. They also felt it, saw it, lived it. So I do think because there's a generation that was able to rise up from that political moment, we have a lot of progressive leanings in the state and a lot of investment in the safety net of our communities. But I do feel, if we could replicate what's happened, all the good stuff here in California, and if we could definitely continue fighting back, I think that I would feel a little bit more excited about the political process and being able to, jump back in it as well. But I do think, that I continue to gain strength from many of you who still continue to fight for, more vibrant communities and for more opportunity for others at the local level, that I think it's just really important to continue to share your stories and create spaces such as this so that we can continue to gain courage from your courage.
We've got some time. I'd like to know if there were some questions. There was a question over here. Hold on a sec. We'll get you something.
Mic runner. Younger mic runner around.
Hi, my name is Priscilla Soria. I'm 17 and I was born here in Watsonville, but I barely moved back here like in January, but my family lives here. And this kind of, I wasn't expecting to come, but I kind of barely found out about it until this morning. Me and Kayla, we always have big political talks and stuff. But coming here has given me a lot of motivation to continue to be involved in politics. And I think that Watsonville has definitely been an example of how we can overcome what's going on in federal government right now and it gives me a lot of strength, and I'm just like really proud to be from Watsonville, and I'm proud that my mom is finally coming back, because I was the reason why she's coming back here. So I just wanted to say thank you guys for giving this panel, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Right there.
I'm Kathleen. I've only been here about 20 years, but I got involved with local politics because I worked for the school district, and through our union, we worked on trying to get more Latinas on the school board, and then when we saw we needed more progressives, then it was like more progressives. But I know some school boards around the country, I don't know about municipalities, have given the vote to people who are not citizens. And I'm just wondering what you all would think about moving, since the theme is my vote, my voice, what would it do to our vote? Bearing in mind that a lot of our traditional Mexicano families are not progressive. So how would that change the picture if we were to truly empower a larger segment of the community by giving resident non-citizens the vote?
The City of New York allows for non-citizens to vote in school board elections. You have to be a parent to be able to, and I don't know if you have to be a parent currently, I don't remember anymore, or if you've had to be a parent, but I think you have to be currently a parent to do that. And it really does broaden the access to political engagement for folks who otherwise, because of their status, would be kept out. And I think that, the founding fathers, some of the founding fathers were afraid about giving the vote. Every man, at that time, every man, gets the vote. It was only one then allowed. But they were afraid that the rabble, would not be smart enough to be able to vote, and they don't have interest in that. And I've worked with a lot of Latino, both Salvadorian and Mexican people about in Mexico and El Salvador, and also here, the populations. And a lot of them are conservative on certain issues, right? In terms of electoral issues, in terms of bilingual education, in terms of a lot of issues, the majority, that won't be 91%, it'll be more like 80-something%. The majority are going to support initiatives to get bilingual education, to get that kind of thing. When you saw the proposition, you were talking about the propositions in the 90s, when you saw 209, anti-affirmative action, when you saw Proposition 187, when you saw all these propositions coming down the pike, anti-immigrant, anti-affirmative action, overwhelmingly the Latino electorate, and people don't know this, but the Asian American electorate, everyone thought, Asians, they think they're white, they're going to vote, conservatively. But no, the majority of Asians, the majority of Latinos, the majority of African American voters here in California, they voted against those anti-immigrant, anti-affirmative action, and other kinds of policies. I think that opening it up is part of the education, that has to happen. And some of those persons elected to those school boards, they went on into other, into other elected positions as well. And I think it's a way of empowering people. And then we just have to be prepared to, to be part of the education. People aren't always going to agree, and again, some of my favorite sisters, they are anti-abortion. They are, my brother-in-law voted for Trump. They are religious persons, and they are wonderful on other issues, fiscal, progressive issues. And so people are complex, and I think we need to see people like that and see where we're going to be able to be aligned and we won't always be aligned with everybody, on all issues.
I'd like to
Time for one more
suggest,
question?
oh, I was just going to suggest that to the moderator. It's almost like we knew each other.
My name is Takash. My first name is Takash. It's similar with your last name. Anyway, I'm originally from Japan, and we moved from Japan to New Jersey many years ago because of our children's education. And my daughter moved from New Jersey to Watsonville, and she has been teaching in a public school. Anyway, you mentioned about multiracial quotient in the movements in the 1980s, and I'd like to know about Asian Americans' involvement in the movement in the 1980s in Watsonville, because Watsonville has had big Japanese American community and the Chinese community too, and the Filipino community. And how did they get involved? How did you work with Asian American community?
Daniel?
Well, I'm quite capable of talking out loud. Oh, hey,
Thank you, brother. Watsonville has a whole interesting history with the Asian communities that have come here through labor and such. For example, when the Chinese were burned out in the city of Watsonville during the Exclusion Act time periods that went on 120 years ago, they really settled in Pajaro, which is where Brooklyn Avenue was in particular. And they were first and foremost helped invent the row crop technology that we take for granted for irrigation purposes that's affected change. The Japanese community, one of my earliest memories, and I have thought about it for a while. One of my first memories was, I was still kindergarten, elementary, is my mother would tell me stories about how her best friend was taken away when she was 12. Yeah. And that really somewhat brought that kind of awareness to me. I didn't understand the thing about concentration camps or internment and such. And so in the time period of the 80s that we're talking about, a lot of Watsonville, the Nisi families that returned, I believe I'm pronouncing it right, the Nisi, that generation, excuse me for mispronouncing that generation that came here was recognizing of the internment camps and what had happened to them during the time period of World War II. But a lot of Japanese farmers that were strawberry farmers, when the United Farm Workers came in here through organizing, when there's a labor strike, there is no such thing as a peaceful labor strike. And so I've heard it from a few former elected officials that were of Japanese descent that were really kind of worried because a lot of us were followers of Chavez. So I don't want to go off into too much history, but they were very supportive. The Nisi community, the Japanese American Citizenship League, and some of the others were very supportive and and members of the coalitions that we had to be able to move towards district election, because they understood, we all understood that this was a chance for us to have a different kind of representation. And looking at the past, I think they were kind of looking towards the future, and a lot of us were. So we were able to work in coalition with them on certain these things. And there was a reenactment that was done by the Japanese community of the internment, of being rounded up and taken to Betts Hall in the internment. And that was one of the, I wish the technology was able to record that, because it was one of the moving moments for our community to realize some of those tragedies.
It was recorded.
I've never seen it, I would love to see it.
I have a copy of it.
Yeah, but in answer to your question, they were understanding, they were supportive of district elections, so we were going.
I just wanted to mention that there was some Asian American involvement around the frozen food and cannery strike with the labor organizers. And some of them were from the Bay Area, from Oakland and the Bay Area, San Jose. And they worked closely with Oscar Rios as well as part of his group around the labor, the labor organizing. And during that labor strike, they also then began to see that, that there were no Latinos or no other people, who would support the laborers. And they began to ask the question about, what are these district elections that I keep hearing about, right? And then they began to learn, and they decided after the strike was finalized that they would now enter electoral politics. So it was a big decision for their political group. But prior to that, too, there was a Chinese gentleman, Ernest Wong, in 1969, who did serve on the city council. He was appointed. He is from Watsonville. He was a Boy Scout leader. People knew him, and he fulfilled the term of someone who had left. And that person who sponsored him to serve there also sponsored him to get into the Elks Club. His candidacy was refused at that time, because at that time, up until the mid-1970s, the Elks Club was a whites-only policy. So Latinos and any other person of color could not get in. But there has been Asian American involvement, and as Dan was saying, much earlier on, the Filipinos were the ones that really did take on labor issues, and nationally, but also here in Watsonville.
Thank you, Paule. We are done with our time is up for the rental of the room. We've overstated. If there are people who have questions, we'll be glad to stick around a little bit and answer those questions. I'd like to introduce...
We actually are going to invite anybody who wants to, we're heading to
Well,
Ellis at the
let me
airport.
finish.
They don't hang around here in the room. We're going to Ellis at the airport where there's food and drink. And these people are all going to be there, so. Well, I don't know if Daniel will go to the airport, but everybody else is going.
There's 300 acres within the city limits that's available for housing, but we never talk about that. Saying that.
Judy?
Thank you. On behalf of Pajaro Valley Arts, I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here and sharing your stories with us. It's tremendous. This was made possible by a grant from California Humanities. So we do have some surveys over there. If you'd like to fill out a survey about your experience today, we'd really appreciate it. If you can't do it today, take it with you, get it back to us. The show is up through Sunday, and if you haven't made it to the gallery, it's fabulous. We have postcards in case you'd like to pick one up. Last, we have a show opening up at Sierra Azul Nursery and Gardens, our sculpture show, so that's coming up too. All right, thank you so very much.